For years I thought the locked doors, the punishments, the red thread were normal. Until the day my grandmother broke her silence after 4 decades. What she revealed destroyed everything I believed about my family.
Welcome to Reddit Toxic Family Telltales channel. New episode every day.
My uncle was about to force my little cousin. She was only 11, into a marriage. That was the moment I snapped. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. And because I spoke up, 2 years later, half of my relatives are in prison, and the rest keep begging me to pretend nothing ever happened. But this story, it didn't start with that wedding. It started with a language. A secret language that changed our lives forever. See, in my family, silence wasn't just expected from women, it was worshipped. The rule was simple. After a girl's 16th birthday, her voice was treated like poison. And at midnight, you went through what they called the silent ceremony. Picture this. Your father holds you down while your mother ties a red thread. Not across your lips literally, but on your wrist, as a reminder. A shackle disguised as tradition. Break the vow once, you'd be locked in the laundry room, no food, no light. Do it twice, they'd take a tooth. And no one, ever, dared break it a third time. For men, silence was a prize. Whoever had the quietest daughters earned the most respect. At family gatherings, my uncles would brag about their girls the way kids brag about baseball cards. Mira hasn't spoken a word since January, Uncle Dev would say, holding up his fingers in triumph. And Uncle Raj would smirk, leaning back. That's nothing. Priya's going on 2 years. And it wasn't just bragging. When Priya went to the doctor and got asked a simple question, she just pointed to me so I'd answer for her. Looking back, it sounds insane. But for us, that was just life. Now me? I was the loudest person I knew. I couldn't get through a conversation without laughing at something, even if it wasn't that funny. I loved singing at the top of my lungs, making weird sounds just to mess with friends. And I knew, if I didn't figure out a way around this, my life would be over at 16. But I hoped it would just disappear on its own. And then one day, fate threw me a lifeline. 7th grade. Mr. Brown announced that everyone had to choose a foreign language. My ears perked up because one of the options was ASL, American Sign Language. And it counted. My heart pounded. This could be it. See, we were living in the US, but the rule was the same. Once a girl turned 16, she was shipped back to the homeland, forced into silence, forced into motherhood. But if I could master this, maybe I'd have another way to speak. So, 3 times a week, I sat in Ms. Brown's classroom, learning to talk with my hands. Every second felt like stolen time. If she so much as emailed my parents about it, I was finished. And the craziest part? I didn't even know what I'd do with it. Nobody around me knew the language. Until Diwali dinner. Every relative from the motherland packed into our house, the biggest celebration of the year. But as I looked down the table, I saw Priya, sitting all alone. Silent tears rolling down her face. 17 years old. 1 year into her silence. Something in me cracked. I slipped her a glass of water with a folded note in my hand. Meet me by the garden shed. Bring your sister. When people asked why, I lied. I said her sari looked wrinkled and I was going to show her how to fold it properly. That was the start of everything. At every family gathering, while the men watched cricket and the silenced women served food, I pulled the younger girls aside. They were desperate, hungry. I taught them the alphabet first, then words, then whole conversations that flowed through our hands like fire. We got sneaky, signing under the table while washing dishes, hiding our hands in the soapy water. We even made secret signals. A flick of the wrist meant, someone's coming. A thumb brush meant, save it for later. By the time I was 15, we were a network. 12 girls between 9 and 15, all fluent in a language their fathers couldn't touch. Even the older women noticed. But they stayed quiet, maybe because they saw hope in it. And then came the wedding. My cousin Angel's wedding. She was 15, dressed in red, marrying a 65-year-old man who wanted her specifically because she was well-trained in silence. Halfway through the vows, I spotted her little sister at the edge of the crowd, glaring at me. And then her hands moved. She signed, he hits her. And when she tugged at her sleeve, I saw the bruises. Angel stood there, dressed like a bride, but chained in silence. Something inside me just broke. As the final vow began, I shot to my feet. And this time, I didn't use my hands. I used my voice. She doesn't want this marriage. He's been hurting her. The room went dead. My mother's face drained of color. 200 guests turned to stare at me like I'd set the house on fire. My father grabbed my arm, whispering threats about shame and punishment. But then, 6 other girls stood up. Voices that hadn't been heard in years suddenly tore through the silence. We know about the beatings, one shouted. This is illegal, another screamed. And then, sirens. 2 police cars. A CPS van. Someone had tipped them off about the child marriage. I never found out who. Officers stormed in. They pulled Angel aside, questioned her gently, checked her arms. She cried as they took photos of the bruises. The groom tried to sneak out the back, but a cop stopped him. The men in my family went wild. My father's grip on my arm tightened, hard enough to bruise. Uncles barked at their daughters, faces red, but they couldn't hit them. Not with the cops watching. My Uncle Dev made a grab for his daughter's hair, but an officer yanked him off her. that only fueled the rage. The whole room was fire and chaos. Finally, the lead officer raised his voice, shutting it all down. He said the wedding was over, and there'd be an investigation into abuse and underage marriage. The groom used the distraction to slip away this time, and no one stopped him. My father dragged me out by the arm. His silence was worse than shouting. My mother followed, clutching her prayer beads so tight her knuckles looked bone white. In the car, my father seethed. Said I'd destroyed his reputation. Said the men would never respect him again. My mother whispered prayers, refusing to meet my eyes. I just stared out the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks, holding back tears. When we got home, he shoved me into my room, took my phone, my laptop, locked the door from the outside with a click that sounded final. Through the vent, I heard him calling my uncles, warning them about the police, telling them to keep their daughters home until it blew over, planning a family meeting at my grandfather's. I curled up on my bed, thinking of Angel, wondering if she was safe now, hoping she was, and thinking of the other girls, locked up in their rooms, punished for daring to speak. That night, just past midnight, I heard a soft knock on my door. My heart skipped. I thought it was my father coming back. But it wasn't. It was my Aunt Mira. She slipped inside like a shadow, carrying a plate of rice and dal, still steaming. She couldn't speak. She was one of the silenced women, but she touched my cheek with such gentleness it nearly broke me. Then she pointed to the food, and then to her heart. No words needed. I knew what she meant. She was proud of me, even if she'd never be allowed to say it. Then she pulled out her phone. She showed me a group chat I hadn't known existed. My cousins. They were texting, thanking me for speaking up, but also terrified. Some were already locked in their rooms. Their fathers were furious, threatening to send them back to the motherland early as punishment. My aunt left as quietly as she came. I sat there eating, my mind racing. I knew this was only the beginning. The men always regrouped, always found ways to tighten their grip. And now that I'd humiliated them publicly, they'd come down even harder. At dawn, my father unlocked my door. His face was stone. He told me to get dressed in my best sari, the blue one with the gold embroidery. No explanation. Just, we're going to grandfather's. My stomach dropped. Grandfather wasn't just the patriarch. He was the architect, the man who started this silence tradition 3 generations back. If he was calling council, it meant something grim. The drive took 2 hours along twisting country roads. My father didn't say a word the entire ride. My mother sat in the back seat, clutching her prayer beads like they were the only thing holding her together. Out the window, I watched the city fade into endless fields and dark woods. Grandfather's house stood alone, looming and isolated. When we pulled up, I counted more than 20 cars lined along the driveway. Every uncle, every male cousin old enough to have a say. They had all come. Inside, the men sat in a circle on cushions, and grandfather, perched in his armchair like a king holding court. They shoved me into the center of the room. He asked me to explain myself. His voice was smooth, but his eyes were sharp as knives. I told him about Angeli's bruises. I said she was just a child, that the marriage was wrong. He laughed. Actually laughed. He told me I was too young to understand. That I'd been poisoned by American ideas. The interrogation stretched on for hours. They kept pressing me. Who taught me such disrespect? Who else knew the signs? Give them names. I refused. I kept repeating. I only spoke up for Angeli. That's when Uncle Raj snapped. He accused me of corrupting their daughters, his face purple with rage, veins bulging in his temples as he stomped back and forth like an animal in a cage. And then, they started bringing in the girls. First was little Kavia, only 12. She looked so small, drowning in her oversized salwar kameez. Her eyes, normally so bright, were wide and shimmering with tears. Grandfather asked if she knew sign language. She glanced at me, then the floor. Her father smacked the back of her head. The crack echoed through the room. Shaking, she whispered yes. Then came the others. One by one. 8 more girls dragged in like criminals. Some admitted it right away, voices shaking. Others denied it until their fathers threatened them. Until fear crushed the words out of them. Maya, 14, tried the hardest. She held on, saying no over and over, until her father gripped her wrist so hard she yelped in pain. And then, the youngest, Asha, barely 9 years old. She didn't even understand what was happening. She just cried for her mom. Mama, mama. Over and over, until her father barked at her to shut up. My chest burned with rage. I wanted to scream, to shield them, but I couldn't move. I was trapped in that circle like prey surrounded by predators. Finally, grandfather spoke. His voice cut through everything. He said this was an infection, and it needed to be cut out. Every girl who had learned sign language, no matter her age, would undergo the silent ceremony. Right now, he said, desperate times call for desperate measures. The men nodded, some with fire in their eyes, others with something like guilt, but none dared speak against him. They separated us. I was dragged to the basement. Cold concrete walls, a single tiny window near the ceiling, just enough to remind me there was a world outside. They tossed a thin, mildewed mattress on the floor and a bucket in the corner I refused to think about. Grandfather told me I'd stay there until I learned respect. Then the heavy wooden door slammed shut, the lock clicking like a death sentence. That first night was hell. The floor's chill seeped straight through my skin. Every creak of the house above made me flinch. I pulled the scratchy blanket tight around me, praying there weren't rats. They left me there for 3 days. Twice a day, someone dropped cold rice and a tin cup of water. No words, just a plate clattering on the floor and footsteps leaving. Sometimes I thought I heard my younger cousins crying above me. The sound hollowed out my chest. I forced myself to move. Push-ups, jumping jacks, anything to stay warm, to stay sane. I counted them obsessively. I recited poetry under my breath. Whisper-sang songs I remembered. Traced ASL signs against the wall even though nobody could see. The only clock I had was the sunbeam from that little window, creeping across the floor until it vanished each evening and left me in total black. On the 4th morning, something changed. I heard a car pull up. Not one I recognized. Doors shutting. A woman's voice. She was asking for me by name. My pulse spiked. Grandfather's voice floated up, syrupy sweet. He told her I was sick, resting. But the woman insisted. Said she was my counselor. Said she was here for a welfare check. It was Ms. Brown, my ASL teacher. She had come for me. My heart soared and sank at the same time. I heard them arguing. Grandfather's calm cracking, his words sharp. Ms. Brown's voice steady, firm. Words like mandatory reporter and school responsibility cut through. Then, footsteps pounding down the stairs. The lock clanged. Grandfather burst in, his eyes burning. He hissed that I'd better look presentable. He threw a clean sorry at me and snarled that if I dared try anything, my cousins would suffer. His stare was like ice. With shaking hands, I changed. Tried to tame my tangled hair. The clean fabric felt alien after 3 days in filth. He gripped my arm like a vice and hauled me upstairs. Ms. Brown was waiting in the living room, arms crossed, her usual warmth gone, replaced with steel. Her eyes flicked over me. My pale skin, the dark rings under my eyes, my unsteady posture. She asked if I was okay. I lied, said I'd been sick, but I was better now. The words tasted like poison. Grandfather stood right behind me, hand heavy on my shoulder, his nails digging just enough to remind me he was in control. She asked why I hadn't answered my phone. Grandfather answered for me, smooth as oil. Said I'd been resting, no electronics, doctor's orders. She didn't buy it. Her eyes narrowed. She asked to speak to me alone. Grandfather cut her off. Said in our culture, unmarried girls don't meet outsiders privately. She stared at him, long and hard. Then, she turned to me, and she asked if I remembered what we'd learned in ASL class last week. My heart nearly stopped. This was it. My one chance. While Grandfather couldn't see, I raised my hands just enough and signed. Help, she saw. I know she did. Her face didn't change, but her eyes widened, just for a second, before she masked it. She nodded slowly and said she hoped to see me back in class soon. Then she left. Relief crashed over me. Hope, but it didn't last. The second her car disappeared down the driveway, Grandfather's hand came flying. The backhand snapped my head sideways. My cheek split against my teeth and I tasted blood. He'd seen my reflection in the window. You stupid girl, he spat. You've made it worse for everyone. Then he shoved me back toward the basement stairs. Hard. I stumbled, catching myself before I fell. The lock clanged shut again. Above me, I could hear him making calls. His voice sharp, panicked. Plans being made. And I knew this was only going to get darker. That night, I couldn't sleep. My cheek still burned from where he'd struck me, and my mind kept replaying Ms. Brown's visit over and over. Did she understand my sign? Would she come back? Or had I just doomed us all like Grandfather warned? I pressed my back against the icy wall, forcing myself not to cry. The next morning, I got my answer. Ms. Brown came back, and this time, she wasn't alone. With her was a social worker named Janet. Middle-aged, sharp eyes, no nonsense, but with a kindness that radiated underneath. They said they were there for a welfare check, part of the procedure when a student vanishes from school. Grandfather had no choice but to let them in, though his smile looked painted on. Within minutes, he barked orders, summoning the ants. Suddenly the house filled with forced normalcy. Pans clattering, the air thick with spices, women bustling like it was just an ordinary day. They scrubbed me up again. One ant yanked a brush through my hair so hard I winced, then pinched my cheeks to force color into them. They wrapped me in a bright blue salwar camise, the fabric stiff against my skin. One leaned in close, whispering in my ear. If you don't cooperate, the husbands are already chosen. Men in their 30s, 40s, some with wives already. You'll all be shipped out by the end of the week. She shoved her phone in my hand, showing me photos of strangers I was supposed to belong to. My stomach turned. They planted me in the living room, trying to make me look normal while I fought to keep my hands from shaking. Janet asked about school, about home life. I gave the rehearsed answers, while Grandfather loomed in his chair, his presence like a shadow pressing me down. But hidden in my lap, under a cushion, was my ASL notebook. When she asked about my favorite subjects, I shifted slightly, and the notebook slipped. Pages scattered across the floor. Months of scribbled practice, drawings of hands forming words, notes about teaching my cousins. Janet bent to pick them up. Slowly, her eyes moved over every page before she gathered them. She handed the notebook back with the smallest nod, so quick my grandfather didn't see. My heart nearly burst. She didn't stop there. She started photographing the house. "Standard procedure," she said as her camera clicked steadily. "The locks on doors. The bars on windows that grandfather claimed were for security. Every detail captured. She promised they'd be back for follow-ups." Grandfather's jaw clenched, but he smiled that fake smile and said, "Of course. Nothing to hide here." The moment they left, everything erupted. Grandfather slammed his fist down, calling an emergency meeting. He declared the ceremony would happen that night. No more waiting. The outside world was creeping in, he said, and our traditions were under attack. His solution: double down. The men prepared the main room with frightening precision. Furniture pushed aside, incense lit, silver plates laid out with scissors and spools of red thread, tools polished to gleam in the lamplight, tools meant to steal voices. One by one, they dragged us girls out of hiding. We were pale, disheveled, some with bruises peeking out beneath sleeves. They scrubbed us down, dressed us in white saris. White for purity, they said. But to me, it felt like we were dressing for our own funerals. White like ghosts, white like surrender. They lined us up by age. I was the oldest. That meant I would go first. I scanned the line. Kavia trembling, barely holding herself together. Maya trying to look strong, jaw clenched but fear in her eyes. Little Asha sucking her thumb, something she hadn't done in years. Too young to even understand. The room filled as the sun went down, shadows stretching long across the floor. The men sat in a solemn circle, their chanting in Sanskrit growing louder, rhythmic, hypnotic. The air thickened with incense, sandalwood smoke curling toward the ceiling like dark fingers. My father approached, a length of red thread in his hands. His face was blank, but his hands trembled. I looked at the girls. Some were crying silently. Others had already gone blank, preparing for silence. My chest tightened. I thought of Anjali wherever she was, of the women lining the walls, wrists bound in red threads, their eyes cast down. I thought of Ms. Brown and Janet, somewhere out there in a world where women's voices mattered. And I made my choice. When my father reached for me, I signed one word to the others. Now. We scattered. Chaos exploded. White saris fluttered like startled birds as girls bolted for windows, doors, any opening. The men hadn't expected this. Shouts rang out. Hands grabbed at dupattas, pulling, tearing. My Uncle Dev caught one cousin near the stairs, his fist closing on her scarf, but she wriggled free, leaving the fabric in his hands. Two girls made it into the yard before being tackled down. I ran for the kitchen, sari tangling around my legs. I hiked it up, not caring about modesty anymore. My lungs burned as I shoved through the swinging door. Inside, the women were cooking like always during ceremonies. Pots of rice boiling, the smell of dal filling the room. They froze when I burst in. I begged them, please help us. Words tumbled out of me like fire. Most averted their eyes, fear chaining their hands to their work. Years of silence training them to obey. But then, Aunt Mira stepped forward. She blocked the doorway just as my father stormed in, panting from the chase. "Move," he barked. She didn't. She shook her head. It was the smallest gesture, but it shook the ground under us. Another aunt joined her, then another, until the silenced women locked arms across the doorway, their faded red threads forming a human chain. And then my grandmother appeared. She never came to ceremonies anymore. She was old, frail, 90 years, wrapped in memories and silence. But now she stood there, hair white and wild around her shoulders, eyes burning. Her wrist still bore the red thread from when she was silenced at 16. Faded, frayed, but unbroken. Until now, with trembling hands, she pulled it free. And then she spoke. For the first time in 40 years, her voice rasped through the room, cracked but strong. "Enough," she said. "I will not let you destroy them too." Her words crashed over the room like a wave breaking a dam. Every pot seemed to stop bubbling. Every chant faltered. Grandfather stared at his mother like she was a ghost. She walked through the circle of men, who parted instinctively as if the sea itself was opening. Slowly, steadily, she picked up the scissors from the ceremonial plate. She cut one red thread, then another. Snip, snip. The sound was deafening in the silence. And then she turned to the women. "You can speak," she said. "You've given them your silence too long. 40 years I've carried this regret. I will not let you carry it too." One by one, the women pulled the threads from their wrists, tears streaming, some sobbing, others laughing through their tears, their voices breaking free like birds released from cages. And then, my mother. She pulled hers off, trembling. She looked right at me, and for the first time in years, she said my name. The sound of it broke me. I wept as if hearing it for the very first time. The men didn't know what to do. For the first time in their lives, they were outnumbered, and worse, outmatched. The authority they'd hidden behind for decades was crumbling in front of them. Some uncles tried to drag their wives back into line, but the women didn't flinch. My aunt looked her husband dead in the eye and said if he tried, she'd leave, and she'd take their daughters with her. She'd been planning for years, bags already packed. And she wasn't the only one. Other women admitted the same. Quiet resistance that had been brewing in secret now rising to the surface. The rebellion that began with sign language had become something much bigger. Grandfather tried to shout it all back into order. His booming voice wasn't booming anymore. Cracked, almost pleading. He went on about tradition, about how these rules had kept us strong. But then his own mother laughed. A sharp, clear laugh that rang through the room like bells. And she asked him, what kind of strength steals the voices of women? Did he know his daughter's favorite colors? Their dreams? Their fears? The silence that followed was louder than any chant. He had no answer. The ceremony collapsed like a house of cards. Families turned on each other, years of resentment spilling out all at once. Some men clung desperately to control, but their wives were finished listening. My father looked stunned, helpless, as my mother unleashed years of unsaid truths. She told him he'd been weak, hiding behind tradition instead of thinking for himself. She said she'd once loved him, but she wasn't sure anymore. She needed to relearn who she was now that she had her voice back. And over the next weeks, everything changed. The family that once felt like an unshakable fortress fractured. Some broke apart completely. The diehards cut ties with those who abandoned the silence. Cousins were shuffled around as parents tried to decide what side they were on. But us girls, the network we built, stayed strong. We texted constantly, formed a secret Facebook group, swapped resources. Ms. Brown helped connect us with lawyers and counselors who knew the culture but wouldn't excuse abuse in its name. Not every case stuck. Not every abuser got punished. But it was enough to scare some of them. Enough to shake the ground beneath their authority. And the secret was out. Local news got wind of it. Reporters started calling, asking for interviews. The community couldn't hide in the shadows anymore. At home, things shifted slowly. My parents barely spoke to me at first. The house felt strange, like the walls themselves were learning how to absorb sound after years of silence. Then one day, my mother made aloo paratha with extra butter. Then mango kulfi like when I was little. She started asking about school, her voice shaky and unfamiliar, but hers. She told me about her childhood dreams. How she'd wanted to be a teacher. How she loved to sing. My father took longer, but eventually he asked me to teach him ASL. His hands were clumsy, but he managed the words. I'm sorry. Not every family changed. Some doubled down, marrying daughters off faster, even shipping them back overseas. We couldn't save everyone. That truth still weighs heavy on me. But cracks had formed in the wall of silence. And through those cracks of voices were finally escaping. My grandmother became our fiercest ally. She visited families, telling her story of 40 years in chains. She told men what they'd missed. The poems she'd written in her head but never spoken. The advice she'd wanted to give. The jokes she'd swallowed. She told women they were stronger than they knew. Some men listened. Others didn't. But she kept speaking, determined to make up for every word she'd been denied. The next Diwali was different. Half the usual crowd didn't come. But those who did filled the house with noise. Women laughed and chatted freely, voices mingling with fireworks exploding outside. Some still wore red threads, but now it was choice, not compulsion. The men felt smaller somehow, forced to make space in conversations they once owned entirely. Anjali was there too, living with progressive cousins now back in school. She still had nightmares, but she was healing. She chopped her hair short, traded saris for jeans. When she thanked me for speaking up, I told her the truth. It wasn't just me. It was all of us. Every girl who stood up that day. Without them, nothing would have changed. We kept teaching sign language. Not because we had to anymore, but because it had become our language of rebellion, of freedom. Mothers learned it to speak with daughters still searching for their voices. We even made new signs, ones for feelings too deep to put into words. Signs for the ache of silence, the joy of being heard, the fear that still lingered. Months later, my father and I sat in the garden, the same spot where he'd once taught me to ride a bike. He admitted he'd followed tradition blindly, never questioning because his father hadn't. But watching my mother reclaim herself, he realized what he'd missed. He told me he was proud of me, proud that I'd been braver than him. He still struggled, but he was trying. The community split clean in two. At the grocery store, families avoided each other like enemies. Even the temple had to hold two separate services. My uncles tried to create their own temple with the old rules, but they couldn't gather enough support. Grandfather made one last desperate attempt. He called a council of male elders from across states, hoping to unite them, to banish the families who'd broken tradition. But my grandmother, oh, she wasn't finished. While he gathered 30 men in his living room, she had been gathering women for months. When the day came, she filled a community center with more than 200 women. Women who had traveled hundreds of miles, red threads left at home. The men had 30, the women had 200, and for the first time in 3 generations, the silence was broken for good. My grandmother didn't stop with her first speech. She stood tall, her voice raspy but strong, and this time, she named names. She told the truth out loud, the things we'd only whispered about in kitchens and bedrooms. She talked about which elder had hit his wife for humming while she cooked. She told the story of a girl who had ended her own life rather than endure being silenced. She had dates, details, receipts that made their claims of tradition crumble into what they really were, control and abuse. And the effect was immediate. Women from other communities went home that very day and ripped off their red threads. Their husbands called my grandfather in fury, screaming that his family had infected theirs with rebellion. But the network was already growing. Girls from other states started messaging us, asking how to learn sign language, how to resist. The rebellion was spreading. My father paid the price first. He lost his job. His boss was one of the traditional uncles. But then something amazing happened. My mother got a job for the first time in 20 years. She started working at a daycare, finally living her dream of teaching. Her voice grew stronger by the day. She even sang while cooking, now badly but joyfully, and the sound made the whole house feel alive. But the traditionalists weren't done fighting. The next crisis came when Uncle Raj tried to kidnap his own daughter from school. He showed up with 2 men, tried to shove her into a van. But the school was ready, we'd warned them. They locked down instantly and called the police. Raj was arrested right there in the parking lot while his daughter watched from a classroom window. That was when things got ugly. Our tires were slashed. A brick came crashing through our window one night. My dad installed security cameras and my mom learned how to use pepper spray. We started traveling in groups, checking in constantly. We were scared, but we weren't backing down. And the girls who'd already been forced into marriages, they started reaching out to us. Some found the courage to pursue divorces or annulments. Others were still trapped, but at least now they had someone to talk to. They weren't alone anymore. We even raised money to help some of them start over. Maya, my cousin, stepped up as our loudest voice. 16 now, bold and fearless. She started a YouTube channel telling our story. Her videos went viral, not just in our community but worldwide. She got death threats, sure, but she also got messages from girls across the globe, all trapped in similar cages. And then came the breaking point. My cousin Nia's 16th birthday. Her parents were traditional but wavering. They planned a smaller ceremony, not the full silencing, just a symbolic thread tying. Nia played along. She smiled. She let them tie the red string. And then she stood up. She gave a speech she'd been practicing for weeks. She said she wanted to be a doctor, that she had dreams, and dreams needed a voice. She said she loved her parents, but not their traditions. Then she took the thread off and handed it back. Her mother broke down crying, and pulled off her own thread, too. Her father just stood there, stunned, as his wife spoke his name for the first time in 20 years. And that became the new pattern. Girls would play along until the crucial moment, then refuse. Some families exploded. Others accepted it. But every refusal made the next one easier. The tradition was dying birthday by birthday. Meanwhile, my grandfather's health started failing. I think losing control broke something inside him. He had a heart attack and spent weeks in the hospital. And my grandmother sat by his bed, speaking every day, pouring out 40 years of unsaid words. I don't know if he heard her, but she needed to say them. When he came home, he was smaller somehow, quieter. He stopped calling meetings, stopped trying to control. He just sat in his garden, watching the world move on without him. Sometimes I almost pitied him. But then I'd remember the basement, the bruises on my cousins, and pity faded. The next Diwali there were 2 celebrations. The traditionalists held theirs across town, hushed and stiff. Ours was loud, vibrant, full of women's laughter and voices. You could hear us from blocks away. Anjali came too. She'd been accepted to college, pre-law, determined to help other girls like her. She still carried scars inside and out, but she was healing. Her little sister lived with her now, safe from the marriage their father had planned. And then, something I never thought I'd see. My parents renewed their vows. But this time, my mother spoke her own promises. She vowed never to be silent again, vowed to teach her daughters to use their voices. And my father? He promised to listen, to value her words. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. The sign language didn't stop, it grew. Now we taught it to parents, siblings, anyone who wanted to learn. Some of the older women struggled with arthritis, their hands stiff, but they signed anyway. They'd waited too long not to. Ms. Brown received a state award for what she'd done. She brought us all to the ceremony. We stood together and signed thank you. A sea of hands moving as one. She cried, saying we had taught her more than she'd ever taught us. Not everyone embraced the change. Some families moved away, searching for places where the silence tradition still ruled. We couldn't save those girls, but we stayed ready in case they ever reached out. Then that spring, my grandmother passed away. At her funeral, hundreds of women spoke. They told stories of their first words after silence, of the courage she gave them. Even some men admitted they had been wrong. My grandfather sat in the front row, hollow and lost without her voice filling his days. By the time I graduated high school, the silence tradition was nearly gone. Some families kept watered-down versions, symbolic threads worn for a day. Others dropped it entirely. Only a handful clung to the old ways, isolated and shrinking. I got into college on a scholarship, planning to study social work. I wanted to help other girls the way I'd once needed help. My parents were proud, though my father sometimes still blinked in surprise when I spoke my mind. The network we built became official. a nonprofit helping girls escape forced marriages and abuse. We ran workshops, taught sign language, built safe houses. Some of the women who had been silenced the longest became our fiercest advocates. At my last family gathering before leaving for college, I counted voices instead of silences. 23 women talking, laughing, singing. My youngest cousin performed a dance to a song she'd written herself. My aunts debated politics while cooking. My mom told embarrassing stories about me. And the men? They listened. They cooked. They tried. Change was slow, but it was happening. I still sign sometimes, when words aren't enough. The language that saved us became part of us. We teach it to every new girl, just in case. But now it's a choice, not survival. The night before I left for college, I looked at the red thread bracelet on my wrist. I cut it off, tossed it away. I didn't need it anymore. None of us did. We had found our voices, and we would never, ever let anyone silence them again.
Thanks for watching. Today's train wreck is over, but tomorrow's ride is already on track. Subscribe so you don't miss it.